Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let me get on my hat, and let's knock this out. Alright, first question. Jason, longtime subscriber, recently added some good weight to my squat. However, I found over the years, holding the bar inside the ring seems to be the best way to keep a good, tight frame. Although I'm finding my wrists and rear delts are under a lot of stress from this. How can I fix the problem? Must be a flexibility issue. Sorry about that burp there, guys. Haven't even eaten breakfast yet. I don't know why I'm burping. That black coffee. Okay, yeah, for a lot of people, that's the best way to create that shelf on your upper back. As far as your wrist hurting, you're gripping the bar too tight. That's easy to fix. You need to remember, you're gripping the bar on the squat for what reason? To keep a tight grip or to just hold on to it to balance it? Get it in your fingertips. Quit gripping the bar all the way. You don't need to wrap the thumb around it hard. You do that, it'll give you a little more mobility in your fist. A lot of those problems are going to go away. Problem solved. Right? Pretty easy. So that's what I recommend for that. As far as the rear delts hurting, that's just the weight sitting on them. You might need to adjust the bar a little bit. Assuming your rear delts are built up enough, you should be able to move the bar maybe another inch. And you got to remember, you're not setting it squishing the rear delt, you're using the rear delt as a shelf. The bar is supposed to sit between the lateral head of your delt and the posterior head of your delt if you're going to do that sort of squat, the type of squat you're trying to do. That's where it needs to sit. So maybe you need to shift it just a little bit so that it kind of gets pinched between the two heads of the delts, rather than squishing the rear head of the delt. But you know what? Some discomfort's going to happen there because you might be having 400 plus pounds sitting up on top of your delts. There's going to be some discomfort. There's discomfort of putting that much weight up on your body. That's normal. But the wrist thing, totally fixable. Just adjust your grip. Don't grip it so hard. Get just your fingertips in it if you have to. Alright, next question. I'm 5'10", 185 pounds, deadlift 395 for 5, squat 335 for 5. So I'm decently strong, but I look skinny in clothes and have a small gut and love handles, but my waist measures 39 inches at the navel. I'd like to drop some fat because it looks shitty, but is this a health concern? That's kind of funny. You're talking about the 39 inches and you're 185 and lift. I get called fat online all the time and my waist measures smaller than that. But I digress. As far as that goes, you're not obese. You probably carry a little extra fluff, but considering you're, how tall? 5'10", 185, your strength numbers indicate that you've gained probably at least 2/3 of the muscle you're going to gain for your whole life drug-free. You've probably gained 15 pounds of muscle already from training, so without that muscle you'd be 170. That's still in the healthy range. However, if you wanted to drop some body fat, you probably wouldn't see any real health benefits from it. If you have a small gut, a little bit of love handle, you might see some minor improvements in your blood work. You're not carrying enough body fat for it to be unhealthy or a concern. However, if you wanted to lose 5 to 10 pounds of body fat and take the time to do it, I don't see a problem with it. If you'll feel better about yourself, go ahead and do so. And I know I promote health primarily first, but I also promote people's self-esteem. Building yourself up, and if you feel like having that little bit of gut and love handles bothers you, then go on a diet for a while. Lose 5 pounds. Lose 5 pounds. Do it carefully, do it slowly, and then reassess and see how you feel. See how you feel about yourself. Because I think when you have said you're not in the obese range and you're worried about that for health reasons, I think that is basically saying, hey, I just don't like having this little bit of gut. So I'd say go ahead and lose 5 pounds. It's not going to hurt you to do so. It might benefit your health slightly, probably not, but it might. And if it makes you feel better about yourself, then by all means do so. And if you do it carefully, you shouldn't lose any strength. So, you got my permission. If you want to lose 5 to 10 pounds, go ahead, brother. Alright, next question. Okay, deload. So if we decide to do a 5 or 6 day deload instead of a full days, I think you mean 7 days, is that okay? During a deload, it's just the CNS that we're trying to give a break, or is it the muscles as well? Alright, he's basically asking, can he deload for 6 days instead of a full week? Because it's just the CNS you're allowing to recover. No, it's your whole body. You're allowing your peripheral nervous system to recover. You're allowing your connective tissue to recover. Deloading, one of the biggest reasons people deload is overused connective tissue. Their connective tissue is getting too tacked, it's getting too stressed, it needs to heal, it needs to recover. So no, it's not just the muscles, or it's not just the central nervous system. It's all sorts of systems in your body. And I think you're really overthinking this. When we recommend a 7-day deload, it's because most of us plan our training around a weekly schedule. We plan our training around a weekly schedule. We plan our lives around a weekly schedule. That's what we do in the real world. That's how people schedule their jobs, their lives, everything else around the week. So the deloads are done in a week for that reason. And I think when you're saying, well, I want to do it in 6 days instead of 7, I'm not sure what you're even talking about. Basically, if you train 4 days a week and you deload 3 of those, maybe that's what you're talking about doing. You're overthinking this. Just take a 1-week deload and reset your training and come back to your progression after a week. It's not that big of a deal. People really tend to overcomplicate and convolute this stuff. And if you take less than a week for your deload, don't come back crying if your connective tissue hurts or you don't make the proper adaptations. But guys, people overthink some of this stuff sometimes. A 6-day deload instead of a 7-day. Come on. Just take a week off. Just take a week with lighter weight. Your body will thank you for it. Don't be that eager to always get back to progression. That's not always the best way to progress. It's not the best way to progress. You gotta learn to tone it down a notch. Don't try to be so hardcore all the time. Alright, next question. Hi Jason, when I stall on a main lift like weighted dips, weighted chins, can I replace that lift entirely with an alternative and carry on about my progression? Example, I stall on weighted chins, replace that with pendlay rows, stall on dips, replace those with close grip bench press. Thanks. That's one popular method to do it. It has its pros and cons like everything else. I would say for people, the con of it is you are losing some of the motor patterns for the old lift that you were really focusing on. And when you start to make progress again, when you replace a lift, let's say you drop the weighted dip and you go to the close grip bench press. The reason you make progress on it quickly is because of the motor patterns, particularly if you haven't done this lift in a while. But what I'm going to say to people, if a lift is really important to you, do not replace it for more than 6 weeks. Don't replace it for more than 6 weeks, because you're going to really lose motor patterns in it. And so what's going to happen, you're going to have a seesaw effect where you go back and forth to these lifts and you regain neuromuscular efficiency sometimes with minimal growth when you first start relearning the lift. So a lot of people switch these things out too often, like, yeah, but I'm making progress, but you're not, because the first week you were weak on it, the exercise, not because of the muscles, but because the movement pattern. And I mean, that's the downside to doing this. The upside, you can always feel like you're progressing. It's going to keep you motivated more. And you're still working the same basic muscles, you're working the same basic functions. But I guess what you need to ask is it really that important to you to progress all the time, or do you understand that stalls are just an intrinsic part of training? And rather than change the exercise, sure, you could change the exercise. You could also prevent stalls just by using proper periodization on the same lifts too. Honestly, you can do either one. Truth be told, we could argue all day long as to which is better. There are downsides to doing whatever we do, and there's pros to doing whatever we're doing. But if you want to try this for a while, if you feel like you're going to feel better on it, go ahead. But I would recommend that you keep the motor patterns fresh on at least the old exercises. So at least once every 3 weeks. At least once every 3 weeks, come in and do a session with the old exercise. Unless you were doing that exercise purely as some sort of accessory movement in which you're doing it just to gain overall muscle in those areas and you don't care about the direct performance. It's not like a primary exercise for you. But if it's an important exercise to you, doing that might not be the best way. I would limit this to normally accessory type movements that you're doing just to gain size in those areas that you're not doing them as a primary performance carryover for something else you're doing. Alright, next question. Yo Jason, on your basic intermediate program to incorporate cleans as a 6 heavy compound after front squats, deadlifts, pendlays, and presses, what sort of reps and sets and progression would you recommend to reap the clean benefits? Power cleans need to be done with low reps. Don't go over 3 reps on your power cleans. That's what I recommend. Maybe you could go to 5. I would recommend putting them in with maybe 3 sets of 3. could be an option. But remember, you're adding them in as an accessory movement, and that's fine. If you come in after those and you come in and you perform 3 sets of 3 and you just slowly progress on it, it's going to be fine. In fact, what you're going to find, because you're running all these progression curves on this intermediate program, you're running all this progression on there, whenever the weights undulate up and down, you're going to find on those harder weeks, you're actually going to find it harder to do the power cleans anyways. So honestly, treat them like an accessory movement. Just treat them like an accessory movement. You could come in and formulate your own volume on them based upon the patterns. Like if you're talking, I assume you're talking about my intermediate off-season program, because I don't have another intermediate program out. But if you're going to do them then as an accessory, yeah, do them at the end. Come in and do triples with them. You know what? You could base it upon the volume you're doing with the other stuff. What you could do, you could come in and pick a weight like 80% of your max, and you could do 3 sets of 3 on all the weeks where you do 3 sets, and you could increase it to 4 on the weeks where you do 4 sets and 5 on the weeks that you do 5 sets. And you know what? You could drop it back down and keep it at the same percentages over the course of the training. Or if you feel really strong on it, when you get to those 5th weeks each time, if you feel really strong on the power cleans and you're not struggling to do the 5 sets of 3, then you could go ahead and add 2 kilos or 5 pounds in the next block. But if you're struggling with it, don't increase it. And that way it'll keep the progression really simple, and it will keep it somewhat in line with your primary exercises. So that wouldn't be a bad way to go. All right, next question. Ben Rice said in his YouTube live video that he is not genetically gifted and that he reached where he is due to hard work and years of training. I'm naturally skeptical of this. Your thoughts? I like Ben Rice. But he's full of shit on this. Now, does that mean he's lying? That's a big difference. People need to understand, to be lying, you have to know you're not telling the truth. He maybe honestly believes that he's not genetically gifted. I've heard his explanation for why he claims he's not genetically gifted. It's because there's no athletes in his family. No one's athletic in his family. Therefore, he must not have the genes to be really strong. That's bullshit. That doesn't determine what genes you have because of what other people have tried to do in your family or didn't try to do. Tells you nothing about their potential. Now, that being said, has Ben Rice been lifting for many years? Yes. Does he train really fucking hard? Yes. Is he really genetically gifted? Yes. Because I don't give a fuck how hard you train or for how many years. People don't squat over 600 pounds raw. You don't squat over 600 pounds raw without being enormously fat and being 300 pounds. Drug-free, without being genetically gifted and working really hard. That being said, plenty of guys on tons of drugs still don't have the genetics to squat 600 pounds even when they train hard. So just throwing that out there, something people need to consider when people talk about, well, I'm not genetically gifted. Of course he is. He's extremely genetically gifted. And his only explanation of why he thinks he isn't doesn't actually make sense. So I think this is what he tells himself so that he can say, hey, this is just because I work so hard, and if someone doesn't achieve what I do, it's just because they didn't work hard enough. Well, that's not true. He is genetically gifted. His lifts are those of someone genetically gifted. That doesn't mean he didn't train hard. But someone else could train themselves into the ground for years who has just normal genetics for strength, and they might be lucky to get to a 500-pound squat. They'd be lucky to get to a 500-pound squat. He's a beast. You know, he trains hard and he's very genetically gifted. If he wants to be in denial of his genetic gifts, that's his business. All right, next question. How much meat is safe to eat? There is so much conflicting evidence concerning high-protein diets and then the vegan diets. Will I die from a heart attack if I eat 3 servings of meat a week? There isn't conflicting evidence, guys. All right. People need to understand this. Stop listening to stupid-ass vegan propaganda. They don't have evidence that meat harms you. I want you to think about it. They don't have evidence that meat itself harms you. They have evidence that excessive saturated fat intake can be problematic. And most nutritionists agree with that. So your problem when people say meat, well, what does meat mean? You're talking about servings of meat. what serving of meat? How much saturated fat's in it? What's the composition of it? You know, if you're eating 30 plus grams of saturated fat a day, most dietitians are going to be like, hey, that's too much. You need to back that down. But a serving of meat could have 3 grams of saturated fat. It could have 1 gram of saturated fat. Now, if that was your saturated fat intake every day and you ate 1 serving of this meat every day, you're so far within the safety zone, there's no registered dietitian who's going to call that dangerous. I would say there's no upper threshold on meat intake. There's an upper threshold on saturated fat intake, and most of the experts out there I've seen generally recommend women don't go over 20 grams of saturated fat a day, men over 30. That when you start hitting those numbers, 20 grams of saturated fat for women, 30 grams of saturated fat for men is probably not good. Probably too much. You need to back that down. Not ideal for cardiovascular health. But it doesn't have to come from meat. You could get that amount from peanut butter if you really pushed it and tried. Not saying most people are going to, but it could be done. You could do it from coconuts also. So the whole point is your numbers don't tell us anything. The concern is excessive saturated fat intake, not meat intake. And don't listen to these kooky ass vegans with this. They don't have evidence for this shit. They make it up as they go and they cherry pick a little bit of data. They just fucking make it up. That's not evidence. Go look at what the mainstream registered dietitians and nutrition researchers are saying. That's what's going to matter the most. That's where you're going to find your info for healthy diets. You can ignore all the buzz. All right, next question. What would happen if someone with an elite or intermediate lift levels decided to stop lifting, lose all his muscle, and got fat, and then started lifting again while losing the body fat? Would he build muscle due to muscle memory and lose fat at the same time? Thanks. All right, let me ask you a question. Let's not even talk about muscle memory. Let's assume muscle memory doesn't exist. We know it does. Hypothetical, and this is why people need to think about this when they ask these questions. If someone has never lifted in their life and they got really fat, and they have no muscle from lifting, and they start lifting weights while they lose fat, will they gain muscle while losing the fat? Yes. It's been shown over and over and over in like 100 million fucking studies. All right, that's an exaggeration, by the way. We probably have 50 or 60 studies confirming that this happens. So why would you assume that someone who gained muscle from lifting weights for years and then lost that muscle couldn't do the same thing that a noob does? Assuming that muscle memory doesn't exist, shouldn't they be able to do that even if they just started lifting? Yes. Now, considering that muscle memory does seem to exist, right? So they should be able to do this slightly more effectively than someone who's never lifted. So the answer is obviously yes, they're going to regain muscle fairly quickly while losing body fat as long as they're consuming at least enough calories to recover. They're using progressive overload and they're getting enough protein to gain the muscle. Yes, absolutely. It will happen. All right, next question. Jason, what do you think if I do dips on day A instead of shrugs and skullcrushers? Because I think my triceps are lagging part of my lifts. And I also want to get better on that lift. All right. Assuming A, you're talking about my novice program based on your lift selection, I made a video recently discussing the changes I would make to this. People don't have to do skullcrushers at all in that program. There is so much tricep work in the program that you shouldn't have any problems growing big triceps on the program. Your triceps aren't lagging if you're running my novice program, your whole body is lagging. I've already said in there the first things I would cut out if people want to cut exercises out would be the shrugs and the skullcrushers. So maybe you're trolling, maybe you saw that and you're making a joke, or maybe you're serious. I'm going to assume if you ask a question like this, you haven't seen that video and you're serious. No, you could just cut them out. If you're really insistent upon doing dips, you could replace the closed grip bench press with weighted dips. You're still doing bench press, overhead press, weighted dips every week. You're doing at least 5 sets. You're doing 5 to 8 sets for your triceps every workout, so 3 times a week. All right, that means that you are doing a minimum of 18 sets for your triceps every week and progressing on it. You don't need extra tricep work. Your triceps are going to grow from that. So if you want to replace the closed grip bench press with weighted dips, I don't tell people normally to change my program. In fact, I tell them don't change my program. But if weighted dips are really that important enough to you that you're wanting to replace the isolation work with them, just replace the close grip bench press. They're fairly interchangeable as long as you can perform weighted dips safely. Alright, next question and last question of the week. Anyone seen my keys? I would go through, if I were you, find all the pants that you've had on, sorry if you might be British, the jeans, the trousers, whatever, check all the pockets, make sure they're not in there, go check your couch, check in your couch cushions, and if you were really drunk last night and you don't know what you did with your keys but you got home and got in the door okay, I would check the freezer and the refrigerator. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.